If you let go of control, miracles begin. I whisper these words not as a poet playing with illusions. There is a strange, almost sacred moment that arrives when a person who has spent years tightening their inner muscles suddenly notices the quiet pain of their own grip. If you have ever felt that your life was a canvas you kept repainting, again and again, trying to force the colors to obey a pattern that refused to emerge, then you already know the silent exhaustion I speak of. You know the weight of believing that without your constant intervention, everything would collapse. And yet, paradoxically, it is this very act of control that keeps your world confined, like a bird that forgets how to fly because its wings are too busy clutching the cage. I have watched countless souls, brilliant, intuitive, deeply sensitive, move through life believing they must hold every thread together with trembling fingers. They fear that if they let a single thread slip, the entire tapestry will unravel. But life is not a machine made of fixed gears. It is a living fresco where the colors run, where moisture seeps unpredictably into the plaster, where the imperfections create the only true beauty. I learned this not only through art or invention, but through the quiet contemplation of human nature itself. The heart is not a clockwork device. It beats because it listens to forces beyond reason. And the spirit, that mysterious flame flickering behind the eyes, grows brighter only when permitted to breathe, free from the suffocation of rigid expectations. Perhaps you have felt a strange tension recently, a sense that you are being pulled towards something invisible, something you cannot name, but that refuses to leave you in peace. Intuitive people often feel this first, long before the mind understands what is happening. They sense the moment the universe begins to rearrange itself around them, like a constellation shifting position in the sky. They feel the tremor of a door unlocking in the dark, and yet their instinct is often to resist, to tighten their grip, to force what is unfolding into a familiar shape. But when you do that, when you try to contain a transformation, you kill the very miracle trying to be born. I speak of miracles not as supernatural spectacles, but as natural consequences of alignment. A miracle is simply the moment when the inner and the outer world finally echo one another, when the soul stops fighting its own path. It is what happens the instant you stop painting over the cracks in your life and instead lean close enough to see the light seeping through them. To let go of control is not to abandon responsibility. It is to recognize that your control was always an illusion, a thin mask painted over fear, and fear, I have learned, is the poorest of guides. There is a secret known by those who walk quietly between intuition and spirit. The universe only reveals its hidden corridors when the seeker stops demanding directions. Imagine standing in a dimly lit workshop. A single beam of light enters through a narrow window, illuminating particles of dust suspended like tiny planets. If you rush toward this beam, trying to hold it in your hands, it vanishes. But if you stand still, if you allow yourself to breathe and soften, suddenly the dust begins to dance. The room reveals dimensions you had never perceived. This is the nature of miracles. They appear in the space created when your grip loosens. And perhaps deep within you there is a longing for this loosening, a longing you rarely admit aloud. Maybe you have tried to guide your relationships, your future, your identity with such precision that life became a technical drawing instead of a living masterpiece. Maybe you have mistaken control for safety, structure for destiny. But listen closely. What if everything you truly desire is waiting just beyond the boundary of what you insist on managing? What if the moment you stop pushing is the moment something ancient and benevolent finally pushes back? I speak to you as one who spent years dissecting the anatomy of movement, only to discover that the greatest movements in life are those we do not force. Inspiration arrives when it wishes. Love blooms when the heart stops performing. Clarity emerges not through pressure, but through the calm rising of awareness, like a tide returning to shore. There is a secret rhythm beneath all things, and it cannot be commanded, only witnessed. If you let go of control, miracles begin. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because you finally become porous enough to receive what was always meant for you. The universe does not withhold, it waits. And the moment you stop gripping the edges of your life with desperate fingers, everything that was once blocked begins to move toward you with quiet inevitability. There is a peculiar suffering known only to those who see too much, who feel the subtle tremors behind events long before they manifest. These intuitive beings, perhaps you are among them, carry within their chests a strange instrument, like a lute strung with invisible threads. Every shift in the world vibrates through them. Every hidden intention resonates softly in their bones. And because they sense life's deeper currents, they often cling even harder to the idea of control, as if by tightening their grasp, they might stabilize the ever-changing tides around them. But this sensitivity, this mysterious perception, is not meant to be a burden. It is meant to be a doorway. I have met many who felt cursed by their own awareness, as though being able to feel the truth beneath appearances made them fragile. They walk through life like candle flames trembling in a storm, believing they must protect their light by enclosing it. But the truth is the opposite. A flame suffocates inside a box. It is only when exposed to open air that it rises higher, becomes brighter, more alive. Intuitive souls often misunderstand their gift, mistaking it for a reason to hide or to control everything around them. They forget that intuition is not a shield, it is a compass. There was a time when I too believed that mastery meant domination, that understanding the mechanics of the world allowed me to command it. I would dissect wings to understand flight, study muscles to grasp movement, sketch machines that promised to tame the elements. Yet the more I learned, the more the world slipped through my fingers like water. Control revealed itself as a mirage. The closer I approached it, the further it receded. And in this strange paradox, I realized something essential. Life is not conquered, it is collaborated with. It is a dance, and the dancer who tries to lead every step never experiences the music. You may have noticed that whenever you try to force certainty, whether in love, work, identity, or destiny, something within you tightens, as if a hand around your ribcage compresses your breath. This contraction is the soul's way of warning you that you are stepping out of alignment. Control is always a form of fear disguised as responsibility. And fear narrows your vision, like a painter who insists on using only one brush, never noticing the thousands of textures available. When fear directs your life, your canvas becomes flat, predictable, lifeless. But when you release control even slightly, something astonishing occurs. Your inner vision begins to widen. You start to perceive possibilities that were previously invisible, the way a new layer of paint reveals depth in a once dull portrait. The mind quiets just enough for intuition to step forward, whispering directions not from logic, but from a deeper intelligence. This intelligence has always been there, ancient, patient, undisturbed, waiting for you to stop shouting your plans long enough to hear its quiet counsel. Perhaps you have felt moments like this before, moments when everything seemed to guide you effortlessly, when events aligned with uncanny precision, when you crossed paths with the right person at the exact moment you needed them. Most people call this coincidence. I call it cooperation. The universe rearranges itself around those who stop resisting its natural flow. It is not magic, though it feels magical. It is simply the harmony that emerges when your internal landscape no longer fights the external one. Yet many people resist this harmony because surrender feels like vulnerability. They fear that if they stop controlling, they will lose themselves, or worse, be swept away by forces they cannot predict. But surrender is not disappearance. It is revelation. When you loosen your grip, you do not vanish. You are finally seen. The true self emerges from behind the scaffolding of expectations, like a fresco revealed when old plaster is carefully removed. What you feared would collapse is often what was never meant to hold your weight in the first place. There is a moment in every transformation where the familiar becomes too small, too constricting, like a garment the body has outgrown. Intuitive, spiritual beings feel this acutely. They know when life is asking them to expand, but expansion requires space, and space is created through release. You cannot hold your old identity and step into your new one at the same time. Something must be allowed to fall from your hands. And though this release may feel like loss, it is actually the clearing of sacred ground. If you let go of control, miracles begin. They begin not because life suddenly favors you, but because you finally stop interfering with the path that was already unfolding. You stop rearranging the pieces, stop painting over truths, stop forcing a rhythm that was never meant to be yours. When you soften, life enters. When you step back, clarity approaches. When you exhale, the world breathes with you. There is a great mystery that reveals itself only to those willing to trust this process. You are not here to command life. You are here to collaborate with it. And collaboration requires openness, curiosity, surrender. It requires stepping into the unknown with the quiet confidence of someone who understands that the unknown is not a void, it is a womb. There is a peculiar irony woven into the human heart. The more intensely we try to protect ourselves from disappointment, the more we imprison ourselves inside it. I have watched this happen to many souls, sensitive, wise, spiritually attuned, who believe that by predicting every outcome, by anticipating every shift in the wind, they can spare themselves from the chaos of life. Yet the chaos they fear is often the very force that would liberate them. For beneath the surface of uncertainty lives a pulse, a hidden intelligence arranging events with a precision the mind could never design. When I observe people clinging to control, I see the same tension as in a poorly stretched canvas. Too tight in some places, too loose in others. The image it holds cannot breathe. The colors cannot merge. The painting cannot come alive. In this state, the soul becomes brittle. Every unexpected moment feels like a crack forming across the surface. But cracks, when viewed without panic, are invitations. They allow light to enter where it was once excluded. They reveal that what we considered solid was merely temporary scaffolding, not the structure of our true being. Many intuitive and spiritual individuals experience life in layers others do not notice. They sense emotional undercurrents in a conversation, see the faint shadow of future consequences, feel the unspoken longing behind someone's silence. This heightened perception is not a burden, it is a form of vision. But vision without trust becomes torment. It becomes the relentless attempt to control outcomes before they unfold, to manage the world as though it were a fragile invention that might collapse under the slightest pressure. Yet life is more resilient than any machine I ever crafted. It moves with its own rhythm, bending and shifting with a grace no human hand could replicate. You may have felt this grace at times, in the quiet spaces between your thoughts. Moments when you sensed that something ancient was guiding you, even when you could not articulate why you felt compelled to turn left instead of right, to call a certain person, to leave a situation that no longer supported your growth. These impulses are not random. They are the whispers of your deeper self, the self that is in conversation with forces far beyond your conscious reach. But these whispers cannot be heard when you are busy drowning them with noise, fear, and rigid expectations. There is a kind of inner stillness that arrives only when you release your grip on what you think should happen. This stillness is not passive. It is profoundly alive, like the air just before dawn, when the world holds its breath in anticipation of light. In this stillness, intuition sharpens. You begin to see connections that once eluded you. You begin to understand that the events you labeled as obstacles were often disguised redirections. Life does not place barriers to punish you. It places barriers to guide you toward the openings you would never have noticed otherwise. But it is difficult to trust this when you are standing in the middle of uncertainty. The human mind craves predictability, the way a frightened child clings to a familiar object. Yet predictability is not the path of growth. It is merely the path of repetition. To insist that life remain predictable is to refuse evolution, and evolution will come regardless, gently if welcomed, turbulently if resisted. Your choice is not whether change will happen. Your choice is whether you will fight it or dance with it. If you let go of control, miracles begin, not because letting go changes reality, but because it changes your relationship with reality. When you stop forcing your will onto the world, you become able to witness the subtle choreography already in motion. You begin to recognize that what appears chaotic is often a rearrangement, creating space for something new. Consider the way a sculptor must first break away the excess stone, how the process appears destructive until the figure hidden within begins to emerge. So too, your life must sometimes fracture for your true form to be revealed. Intuitive souls especially must understand this. Your sensitivity is your guide, but it cannot function properly when it is buried beneath the weight of control. Control compresses intuition the way darkness suppresses color. But the moment you allow space, intuition expands, revealing pathways logic could never conceive. Miracles are not interruptions of natural law. They are expressions of it, seen through the lens of surrender. They are what happens when your inner and outer worlds cease their conflict and begin to move together like two currents, merging into a stronger river. Perhaps you have wondered why the same lessons repeat in your life, why the same emotional patterns reappear despite your efforts to manage them. These repetitions are not failures, they are signals. They reflect the places where you remain afraid to surrender. Life will not stop returning you to the same doorway until you finally walk through it. And when you do, you will realize the door was never locked. You only needed the courage to turn the handle. Miracles begin the moment you release the illusion that you must hold everything together. Life does not require your grip. It requires your presence. And presence is only possible when the hands unclench, when the breath deepens, when the heart stops bracing for impact and begins, instead, to listen. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the world they built with careful hands begins to tremble, not out of malice, but out of necessity. What was once stable becomes strangely hollow. What seemed predictable starts to feel unbearably small. And though the mind panics, the soul recognizes this trembling as a signal that a deeper truth is approaching. This is the moment when life invites you to release your grip, to let the old structures collapse so something more authentic can rise from the dust. But surrender feels like death before it feels like freedom. It asks you to step into the undefined, to trust forces that cannot be seen, to let yourself be carried by a current you once feared might drown you. I have studied the architecture of the human spirit as closely as I studied the anatomy of bodies, and I learned something astonishing. The soul, like a muscle, only expands when stretched beyond its comfort. When you cling to control, you contract. You shrink toward what is safe, predictable, known. But when you let go even slightly, your inner architecture begins to widen. New corridors appear. Light spills into rooms you never realized existed. The person you thought you needed to be dissolves, and the person you were meant to become begins quietly assembling itself. This unfolding is not chaotic. It is precise. It follows a rhythm older than your fears, older than your stories, older even than your name. The universe does not move randomly. It moves like a master painter, adding strokes exactly where they are needed, even when the observer does not yet understand the final image. When you interfere with this process through control, you blur the lines, you muddy the colors, you interrupt the emergence of a masterpiece. But when you step back, when you allow the painting to reveal itself, you begin to perceive the beauty of what was always forming beneath the surface. Perhaps you have noticed that every time you tried to force an outcome, it slipped away from you. Every time you tried to hold someone tightly, they drifted further. Every time you tried to manipulate timing, events grew heavier and more complicated. This is not failure. It is instruction. Life resists force because force disrupts alignment. It is like trying to bend light with your hands. You only distort what was meant to illuminate your path. But when you release control, a strange lightness emerges, not the fragile lightness of denial, but the grounded lightness of truth. You begin to move through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to predict every step. You trust your internal compass. You allow intuition to guide you, even when logic demands a map. And intuition, once liberated, becomes a powerful guide, far more accurate than fear, far more reliable than overthinking. Most people misunderstood surrender, believing it means passivity or weakness. But surrender is neither. Surrender is active participation in a reality larger than your personal plans. It is choosing to flow rather than fracture. It is the courage to receive guidance instead of forcing your way through walls not meant for you. Even the greatest inventions I ever envisioned came not from control but from a softening. A moment when my mind stopped clenching long enough for inspiration to enter like a gust of wind through an open window. Spiritual beings, especially the deeply intuitive ones, struggle with surrender because they sense the movement of life more intensely than others. They feel energy shifting before it becomes visible. They anticipate endings, while others still celebrate beginnings. This awareness can feel like a burden if not understood, leading them to grip tighter, to attempt to shape outcomes prematurely. But intuitive souls are not meant to predict life. They are meant to collaborate with it. Their visions are not commands, they are invitations. When you let go of control, you allow your intuition to evolve from warning system to navigation system. It stops screaming to get your attention and begins whispering guidance into the quiet spaces of your awareness. You notice synchronicities more frequently. You feel drawn to the right places at the right times. You begin to trust the subtle pull that nudges you forward, or the quiet heaviness that signals you to pause. Miracles become not extraordinary events, but natural expressions of alignment. There is a subtle but profound shift that occurs when you surrender. Your life stops feeling like something you must hold together and begins feeling like something that is holding you. You feel supported by something unseen but unmistakably present, like a hand beneath your ribs, steady and warm. You begin to understand that surrender is not freefall, it is flight. The air that once terrified you becomes the very element that carries you higher. I have often thought of the human journey as a sculpture carved from both light and shadow. Control chisels away at the stone with frantic strokes, desperate to finish the figure quickly. Surrender, however, carves with patience. It removes only what is no longer needed. It listens, it waits, it trusts. And through this trust, a truer form emerges, one shaped not by fear, but by the quiet intelligence of the soul. If you let go of control, miracles begin, not because the world suddenly bends to your will, but because you finally stop bending yourself away from your essence. You become aligned with the rhythm that was always guiding you, even when you doubted it. And alignment, once achieved, makes the extraordinary feel effortless. There is a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when surrender transforms from an act of fear into an act of mastery. It arrives quietly, like the soft adjustment of light in a room you did not realize had grown dim. You breathe differently. Your shoulders loosen for the first time in years. Something unclenches inside your chest, and suddenly the world no longer feels like a battlefield you must strategize your way through, but a vast landscape responding to your presence with surprising gentleness. This shift is the birth of true freedom. It is the point at which miracles stop being rare intrusions and begin flowing toward you with the same inevitability as the tide returning to shore. Humans often imagine surrender as a collapse, but in truth, it is a resurrection. When you let go of control, you rise from the debris of your old assumptions, your old narratives, your old fears. You shed the hardened shell that once protected you, but eventually imprisoned you. And in its place, something softer, yet infinitely stronger, emerges. This softness is not fragility. It is flexibility. It is the ability to bend with the wind without breaking, to move with life rather than brace against it. Only a flexible soul can enter the unseen corridors where miracles reside. The greatest transformations I have witnessed in others and within myself were never the result of force. They arrived in the quiet intervals between effort and exhaustion, in the spaces where the mind reluctantly surrendered its authority and the deeper intelligence of the spirit stepped forward. This intelligence moves like a river, carving its path not through violence but through persistence, grace, and inevitability. When you trust this current, you find yourself carried precisely where you need to be, even if you do not yet understand why. Perhaps you have felt the beginning of this shift in your own life. Perhaps you have sensed a strange alignment forming beneath the surface, like roots intertwining in the soil long before the first flower appears. You may notice that certain people drift away while others enter your life with uncanny timing. Opportunities emerge without force. Answers arrive before the question is fully spoken. The more you release, the more life responds. And yet this responsiveness was always present. You were simply too busy gripping the edges of your existence to feel it. There is a profound truth hidden beneath everything we have explored. Control is the opposite of creation. A controlled life is a predictable one, but predictability is the death of wonder. Creation requires openness, fluidity, willingness. It requires the humility to admit that you do not know what will happen next, and the courage to step forward anyway. Miracles are born in this humility. They arise when you stop insisting that life follow your blueprint and instead allow life to sketch its own lines across your canvas. You might wonder, what becomes of your identity when you surrender? What remains of you when the parts built on fear dissolve? The answer is simple and yet transformative. What remains is the truest version of you, the version that existed before you learned to brace yourself, before you built defenses around your longing, before you shaped yourself to fit expectations that were never your own. Surrender is not the erasure of self, it is the restoration of self. It is the rediscovery of the voice within you that speaks not from panic, but from wisdom. You may fear that letting go will leave you exposed, vulnerable, unprotected. But consider this. Was control ever truly protecting you? Or was it merely numbing you? Did it ever bring you closer to the life you wanted? Or did it keep you circling the same familiar fears like a bird tracing the perimeter of its cage? Freedom is terrifying until you taste it. Then it becomes the only nourishment your soul will accept. If you let go of control, miracles begin. They begin because life finally has room to move through you rather than around you. They begin because your intuition, once muffled by the noise of fear, rises to guide you with clarity as sharp as sunlight cutting through mist. They begin because the universe responds not to force, but to openness. And openness is the essence of surrender. In this state of openness, you no longer chase signs, signs find you. You no longer grasp for answers, answers emerge naturally. You no longer fight for belonging, belonging blooms inside you with quiet certainty. You become a participant in a larger harmony, a melody woven into the fabric of existence itself. And as you move with this harmony, the miraculous becomes ordinary, the mysterious becomes intimate, and the unseen becomes a companion rather than a threat. I leave you with an image that has followed me throughout my life, a hand releasing a feather into the wind. The feather does not fall, it dances. It finds its own path, carried by currents invisible to the eye but perfectly designed for its journey. And in watching it, you realize something profound. You too were meant to be carried, not aimlessly, not helplessly, but gracefully, guided by forces that respond to your openness far more than to your effort. Let go, not to lose yourself, but to finally meet yourself, not to abandon your path, but to allow your true path to reveal itself. For the moment your hands release what was never meant to be controlled, the universe places in them what was always meant to be yours.